everyone, my name is Dorina and welcome back to my YouTube channel, Dorlicious. Today I will be baking for you my favorite cookie recipe, cornflake chocolate chip marshmallow cookies. This is my channel where I will be sharing all of my favorite recipes and other fun food projects with you. Today's recipe comes from Milk Bar. This is a recipe from Christina Tosi. I'm very excited because I love Milk Bar. I love Christina Tosi's story, but since I don't live anywhere near one, I like to make these cookies at home. That's the next best thing. I actually had tested this recipe out a million times. The first time that I made this recipe, I followed the instructions to a T. I weighed every gram of every ingredient out perfectly, but I found that the bake time was way too long at a way too high of a temperature. By the time the cookies were coming out of the oven, they were almost burnt. The marshmallows were completely melted away. It was not this perfect marshmallowy, melty cookie that I had envisioned. So of course, I got obsessed with perfecting this recipe, and so now we have the perfect cookie. After I made the first batch, I made them a few more times and adjusted the cook time, the temperature in the oven. I baked them from frozen. I found that the best way to bake these cookies is to freeze them first and then bake them at a lower temperature for a shorter amount of time. She had recommended to flatten the dome. I stopped flattening the dome. Another thing that I learned is if the marshmallows are too close to the edge of the cookie, they will completely melt away and turn into these marshmallow caramel lacy edge of a cookie, which is fine, but then you lose the structure of the cookie because all of the marshmallow has melted away onto your pan. So I like to hand place the marshmallows, which might sound a little bit ridiculous to do, but trust me, it's totally worth it because the cookie turns out so perfect. Hand place, freeze them first, and you're golden. As far as special equipment goes, you really will need a kitchen scale for this recipe. You can measure it by volume, but it's really better when you measure it by weight. If I told you to make a cup of flour and I did a cup of flour and then we weighed them out, they would be completely different weights. So it's really better to measure them by weight, so that way you have the exact amount that you're supposed to have. The second thing is that I highly recommend having a stand mixer. You can hand mix this, but at the beginning of the recipe, we're creaming together ingredients for almost 10 minutes. So unless you are a professional bodybuilder, I just cannot imagine hand mixing, even using an electric hand mixer for 10 minutes straight. I don't think that you will be able to achieve the aeration and the emulsion with the butter and the sugar and the eggs at the beginning of the recipe that you will need for it to really come together. So if you choose to not use a stand mixer, you've been warned. Same thing if you don't measure them by weight. They might not turn out the way that you think that they will. So that is really all I have to say about these cookies. I just wanted to give you those little bits of information before we got started. As always, I will list all of the ingredients in the description, but a full recipe can be found over on my website, dorlicious.com, and I will link that in the description as well. So let's get started. Okay, first I want to apologize for the lighting. I didn't realize until after I was done making the Cornflake Crunch that I had my ring light on the wrong setting. It created a little bit of a glare, but I fixed it before I fully started everything, so I apologize. Measure out your cornflakes into a medium bowl, and then you're going to crush them with your hands to break them up into smaller pieces that are about half to a quarter of the size of the original cornflake. Just make sure that you're not crushing them into a powder or into the size of sand. To that same bowl, you are going to add the sugar, salt, and milk powder and stir them to coat. Make sure that everything is pretty evenly distributed, and then add in the melted butter and again stir to coat. The butter will act kind of like a glue and let some of the pieces stick together. You're then going to spread them on a parchment-lined baking sheet in a fairly even layer. If you don't put them in a flat, even layer, you can just open the oven while it's cooking and stir them around every so often, which will allow all of the cornflakes to get a chance to turn a nice golden brown color. You're going to bake these in the oven at 275 degrees Fahrenheit for about 20 to 25 minutes, or until they are lightly toasted, so the golden color of the cornflakes should have gotten a little bit deeper, and they should still have some crunch to them once they've cooled. You want these to completely cool before we use them in the recipe, and you will only be using about 3/4 of what we've made. So you can save the rest. These will stay good on the counter in an airtight container for about a week, so you can make these the day before, the day of, as long as you allow them to cool completely before we use them. And for the rest of the ingredients, I have already whisked together all-purpose flour, baking soda, baking powder, and kosher salt in the blue bowl, an egg with vanilla extract. In my stand mixer metal bowl, I have the light brown sugar and granulated sugar, the mini chocolate chips, mini marshmallows, the Cornflake Crunch that we've previously made, and the softened room temperature butter. To my stand mixer bowl with the granulated sugar and light brown sugar, you are going to add the butter. Then we're going to put it in the stand mixer and, using a paddle attachment, cream them together on medium-high for 2 to 3 minutes. Once that's done, you are going to scrape down the sides of the bowl, and anytime I say that, scrape down the sides of the bowl, I am taking the bowl out, removing the attachment, really getting everything off the attachment, fully scraping down the sides. Stand mixers are great, but there are always going to be dead zones, and if you have a big clump of sugar and butter or a big clump of anything that's stuck to the paddle or stuck to the bottom of the bowl, it's never going to get mixed in. You really want to scrape in between each step. It's very important. Add the egg and vanilla and beat again on medium-high for 7 to 8 minutes. It's extremely important not to skip this step and not to cut this time short. It's absolutely essential that you beat these together for that long so that they can fully aerate and emulsify. A good tip at this step too is, once you turn your stand mixer on, place a clean kitchen towel over your stand mixer. This is going to prevent any splashing and keep everything in your kitchen clean. Since you're beating this at such a high speed for such a long time, it really works its way up the sides of the bowl, and sometimes there can be a little bit of splatter. Once you've done that, you are going to again scrape down the sides of the bowl and then add the pre-mixed flour, baking soda, baking powder, and salt. Mix this on low speed just until the dough starts to come together, which shouldn't be any longer than 1 minute. You don't want to mix this for too long because you'll end up over mixing the dough. Don't walk away, set a timer if you need to, and when you're done, scrape down the sides of the bowl again. We're now going to add the Cornflake Crunch and the mini chocolate chips and mix this on low speed. I like to use the stir setting on my stand mixer so that it's not going too fast. You're going to mix these until they're just incorporated, which is about 30 to 45 seconds. If you're choosing to not hand place the marshmallows, you'll now add them in and again stir it on low just until incorporated. But like I said, I like to hand place the marshmallows. If you're in a time pinch, you can totally incorporate them in the stand mixer. So now is my favorite part. Before I add in the marshmallows, I like to give this a big stir once it comes off the stand mixer. Just make sure everything has fully incorporated. So the way I like to assemble the cookie now is using a 2-ounce portion scoop. For uniformity, I also weigh them. So a cookie anywhere from 2 to 2.1 ounces is going to bake about the same. First, I place about 2 to 3 marshmallows in the top center of the scoop, and then I put a little bit of dough on top. Layer 2 to 3 more marshmallows in the center, and then more dough. Essentially, you're just creating a layer of marshmallow, dough, marshmallow, dough. But the biggest thing to remember is you don't want any marshmallows on the sides. You want them on the top, the center of the cookie. If some are exposed on the bottom, that's fine, but you don't want them to be out on the sides. Also, if you end up running out of marshmallows that you've weighed out, it's totally fine to toss in a couple more. I think this time I did it, I ended up needing like 6 more marshmallows. It's also very important to use a portion scoop because it gives you that nice dome on the top of the cookie, which allows it to not fall completely flat when it bakes in the oven. If you don't use a portion scoop and you measure it out by weight or using a measuring cup, just roll it into a ball, make sure the bottom is flat, and leave that domed top. You're going to place these either on a baking sheet or a plate that can go in your refrigerator. I am using a wax paper lined baking sheet because you're going to put these in the fridge to cool for about an hour before we put them in the freezer. This will make sure that the cookie is really solid, so when you put them in a bag to put them in the freezer, they don't stick together. Repeat this until you have used all of the cookie dough. You should get about 24 cookies. I got about 23 because some of mine were on the larger side, but if you weigh them all out to be exactly 2 ounces, you should get 24. Cover your tray or plate with plastic wrap and then chill them in the fridge for about 30 minutes to an hour until they are firm enough and not tacky at all. Once the cookies have chilled, transfer the dough into a Ziploc bag to put into the freezer for at least an hour or until they're fully frozen. This is the most important part. Freezing this dough before you bake it ensures that the marshmallow doesn't completely melt away while you're baking. I don't recommend baking from room temperature or from the refrigerator. Trust me, they're not going to hold their shape and the marshmallow is going to melt away. Once they're fully frozen, you can either leave them in the freezer for up to 3 months to bake off as needed, or you can proceed to baking. You're going to preheat your oven to 355 degrees Fahrenheit. Place the cookies from frozen on a parchment-lined baking sheet, making sure to place them at least 4 inches apart. I'm using a half sheet pan, so I usually bake about 4 at one time. That way, when the cookies spread in the oven while baking, they don't touch each other. Bake the cookies for 15 minutes or until the edges are beginning to turn a light golden brown. They're still going to be on the pale side, a little bit puffy, and the marshmallows should look slightly melty but still intact and lightly toasted. When you take them out, you are going to leave them on the pan and let them continue to cook with the residual heat from the pan. They'll flatten out, they'll turn more golden brown, and they'll look more uniform. Repeat this step until you have baked all of your cookies. I like to do a rotational system using 2 baking sheets. So while one baking sheet has come out of the oven and is cooling, a second baking sheet is in the oven. And I don't take the cookies off the first baking sheet until I take the second baking sheet out. The cookies will keep at room temperature in an airtight container for about 5 days. When they're not fresh from the oven, they are best served after you've microwaved them in the microwave for 10 to 15 seconds. And that is it. These are the cornflake chocolate chip marshmallow cookies. I just have to show you this, a beautiful marshmallow pull. These cookies are so good, and I really hope that you make them. Those were Milk Bar's cornflake chocolate chip marshmallow cookies. It's quite the mouthful. If you make this recipe, be sure to let me know in the comments. I've seen other people make these on YouTube and they never turn out using the instructions as given. So there's gotta be something in there that did not print correctly. I'm convinced. Also, if you make these, feel free to post them and tag me on Instagram so that I can see that you make them, or let me know so that I can see. It really is so exciting to see when someone has made something that I've posted. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to my channel, share it with your friends, and if you want to know every time I post, you can turn on notifications. You can also follow me over on my Instagram, Dorlicious_food. I continue to post there in between videos so you can see what I am up to in between. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time. And they turned into this delicious golden crunchy cornflake crunch, as the name says. Oh, okay. Beautiful toasty marshmallow that's super melty on top. It's so good. It's so good. They're really good cookies. You can either bake them all then, or what I like to do is bake a couple cookies at a time. So whenever you want a cookie, you have them in the freezer already. They're ready for you to just turn on the oven, pop on a sheet pan. Think about it, it's Friday night, you finished work, you really want a cookie, and you're thinking to yourself, wow, thank you for freezing these so that I can have a cookie now. You've got one. You have them in the freezer. They're ready to go. You don't even have to make the cookies. You just pop it into the oven and you're done. I think that's it. I don't think I have anything else to say. These are just freaking good cookies.